The new governess saw all shun the Duke's fragile daughter until she knelt and said, "Dance with me." Whispers rustled through the grand ballroom of Bridgerton Castle like autumn leaves, halting abruptly as Lady Thalen's fan snapped shut with finality. The lantern banquet, the most prestigious gathering of the season, glittered with nobility and ambition, yet all eyes deliberately avoided the small figure pressed against the far wall. There, clutching an amber pendant that caught the gaslight in fractured splendor, stood 7-year-old Lady Serene Bridgerton, the Duke's fragile daughter. "Poor thing," Lady Thelen murmured, her words carrying just far enough. "A shame she insists on attending when her constitution is so delicate." Miss Mira Holden, newly appointed governess to the Bridgerton household, stood at the periphery, silver tray balanced in gloved hands. She observed how the crowd parted like water around little Serene, leaving the child marooned in a sea of silk and judgment. Not a single glance of acknowledgement, not one smile of welcome. The child's fingers twisted the amber pendant, her only movement in that ocean of swirling dance and conversation. The pendant caught the light, then disappeared again in her small palm, a rhythm of hiding and revelation that matched the girl's own existence. "She has not spoken a word since her grace passed," an elderly servant whispered, noticing Mira's gaze. "The Duke permits her attendance only to honor his late wife's wishes, though many believe it unseemly." The servant's eyes darted nervously. "Lady Thelen says the child's peculiarity discomforts the guests." Mira watched as a young lord's sleeve brushed against Serene, and how he recoiled as if touched by illness itself. The girl's face remained impassive, yet her knuckles whitened around the pendant. "Does no one speak to her?" Mira asked softly. "It is best not to encourage her oddness, miss," came the reply. "The Duke himself maintains distance, as physicians' orders recommend minimal stimulation for her fragile nerves." The orchestra struck a lilting melody, and couples formed with practiced elegance. The dance floor transformed into a kaleidoscope of moving color, while Serene remained utterly still, a monochrome shadow against damask walls. Mira set down her tray. "Miss Holden, where are you?" the servant began, but Mira was already crossing the ballroom, her modest grey gown a stark contrast to the opulent surrounding. The music swelled as she approached. Serene's gaze remained downcast, fixed on the amber pendant, her world reduced to that single point of light. Mira knelt, her skirts pooling around her on the polished marble. At eye level with the child she waited, silent, until Serene's gaze lifted, tentative, uncertain, a look of wild fear that someone had noticed her existence. "May I tell you a secret, Lady Serene?" Mira whispered. The girl's eyes widened slightly, though no words came. "I, too, feel rather lost in this grand room," Mira continued, her voice gentle as spring rain. "Perhaps we might be lost together instead of alone." Across the room, Lady Thalen's fan stilled mid-flutter. Conversations faltered as heads began turning, attention drawn by the unseemly sight of a governess kneeling before a child in full view of society. "Dance with me?" Mira asked, extending her hand palm upward. The ballroom hushed completely. Even the orchestra faltered, one violin continuing a moment too long before silence descended like snow. Serene stared at the offered hand, as if it were both miracle and trap. Her small fingers tightened around the amber pendant one final time before she extended her other hand, hovering, trembling, inches from Mira's. "She will not," came a deep voice from the entrance. The Duke of Bridgerton stood framed in the doorway, tall and forbidding, his formal attire as black as midnight, save for a silver watch chain that caught the light. His face might have been carved from marble, handsome, severe, utterly without expression, yet his eyes, fixed upon the tableau of governess and daughter, blazed with something unnameable. "Your Grace," murmured Lady Thelen, gliding forward. "Miss Holden clearly misunderstands her position and the child's needs. Shall I summon the physician? Perhaps Lady Serene should retire." "Enough." The single word silenced her instantly. The Duke strode forward, each footfall echoing in the breathless quiet. He stopped several paces from where Mira still knelt, his daughter's hand now frozen in mid-air between them. "Miss Holden," he said, voice controlled to the point of brittleness, "you were engaged to educate my daughter, not to parade her infirmity before the ton." "With respect, Your Grace," Mira replied, rising slowly but keeping her eyes level with Serene's. "I see no infirmity, only a child at a dance who has not been invited to dance." A murmur rippled through the assembly. Lady Thalen's fan snapped open with violent precision. "You exceed your authority," the Duke stated coldly. "Remove yourself from—" "Father." The word, so small, so clear, so unexpected, silenced the room more effectively than any ducal command. Seren had spoken, her voice thin as crystal but unmistakable. The Duke of Verrington staggered slightly as if physically struck. His hand moved reflexively to the silver watch in his waistcoat pocket. "Father," Seren repeated, her voice gaining substance. "I should like to dance with Miss Holden, if it please you." The amber pendant caught the light as she turned it in her palm. Once, twice, before extending her hand fully to Mira's. "Please," she whispered. The Duke's face transformed, grief and wonder battling across features long frozen in aristocratic control. For an endless moment, the ballroom existed in perfect suspension, a painting of society caught between scandal and miracle. Then, with ceremonial deliberation, the Duke nodded once. "Music," he commanded, his voice rough-edged with emotion. The orchestra hastily resumed, strings trembling as they found their place. Mira's hand closed gently around Seren's, and together they began to move. Not in formal steps, but in a simple, swaying motion that required no training, only trust. "Thank you," Mira whispered to the child. "For what?" Seren asked, her feet following Mira's lead. "For the honor of your first words." Seren's lips curved in the ghost of a smile. "They were waiting," she said softly, "for the right listener." The Duke watched from the edge of the floor, one hand still clutching his watch, the other clenched at his side. In his eyes, memory and present collided with the force of grief, long suppressed. And as the music played on, something cold and rigid in the heart of Verrington Castle began, imperceptibly to thaw. Dawn painted the library windows with pale gold, as Mira arranged arithmetic slates and botanical primers, preparation for her first formal lesson with Lady Seren. 3 days had passed since the lantern banquet, 3 days of whispers that followed Mira through corridors like persistent shadows. "The Duke requests your presence in his study, Miss Holden." The steward stood at the threshold, his tone suggesting an executioner announcing the scaffold. Mira smoothed her grey dress, touched her wooden brooch for courage, and followed the man through the labyrinthine corridors of Verrington Castle. The study door opened upon a sanctuary of masculinity, leather-bound books, oak panelling, and the scent of sandalwood. The Duke stood at the window, his back to the door, silhouetted against morning light. Without turning, he spoke. "You have caused considerable disruption to this household, Miss Holden. I have helped your daughter find her voice, Your Grace." He turned then, his face composed, yet somehow altered from the marble severity of their first encounter. "Indeed. And what qualifies a governess of modest background to contravene a physician's guidance regarding a child of noble blood?" "The ability to see her, sir," Mira answered simply. "Not as an infirmity to be managed, but as a soul to be heard." The Duke's fingers brushed against his watch chain. "She has not spoken so clearly since her mother's passing. 3 years of silence, broken by a mere dance?" Mira supplied gently. His jaw tightened. "You took unconscionable liberty with your position. I took responsibility for a child left alone in a room full of people. Responsibility." His voice hardened. "You know nothing of the responsibility I bear. The Verrington name spans centuries. We do not indulge in public spectacle." Mira stepped forward. "Forgive me, Your Grace, but there is nothing spectacle in a father permitting his daughter joy." The Duke closed the distance between them in 2 strides, looming over her, close enough that she could see the fine lines of strain around his eyes. "You presume to instruct me on fatherhood?" "I presume nothing," Mira replied, holding her ground. "I merely observe a child who reached for connection, and a father who permitted it. However briefly, that permission meant everything to her." Something shifted in his countenance. "Lady Thalen suggests I dismiss you immediately. The physician concurs, believing your influence disruptive to Seren's delicate temperament." "And what does Your Grace believe?" His gaze intensified. "I believe you harbor dangerous notions about your place in this household. My place is beside your daughter, teaching her that her voice deserves to be heard, even if hearing it resurrects pain best left buried." The question escaped him before he could reclaim it. Naked vulnerability in the query. Understanding dawned in Mira's eyes. "She resembles her mother in speech." The Duke turned away sharply. "You are dismissed, Miss Holden. From your presence or from my position?" A weighted pause. "From my presence, for now." The corridor outside felt colder as Mira made her way to the schoolroom, where Seren waited, amber pendant caught between restless fingers. "Will father send you away?" the child asked immediately, her perception acute. Mira sat beside her. "Would it trouble you greatly if he did? You are the only one who sees me." Seren whispered. Even father looks through me as if I were glass. Your father sees you, child, but sometimes seeing causes pain. Because I look like mother? Because love and loss are tangled, and those who grieve deeply fear loving again. Seren's fingers stilled on the pendant. This was hers. Father gave it to me after she... Her voice trailed off. It's beautiful, Mira said, like captured sunlight. Mother said it held her heart. Seren extended the pendant toward Mira. Would you wear it today, just today? Oh, Seren, I couldn't possibly... Please. Then perhaps father will see you properly. No one sees the servants, you know, just as no one sees me. With reverent hands, Mira accepted the amber, its warmth pressing into her palm like a promise. She fastened it around her neck, the pendant resting just below her collar. There, Seren said with satisfaction. Now you carry her heart too. The morning passed in quiet study, until Lady Thelen swept into the schoolroom unannounced, her wine-dark dress a stain against the sunlit white walls. Miss Holden, she said, eyes narrowing on the pendant. The Duke requires Lady Seren's presence for luncheon. Alone. Seren's hand crept into Mira's. Miss Holden accompanies me everywhere. Not today, Lady Thelen replied with cold triumph. Your father specifically requested your solitary attendance. I shall escort Lady Seren to the dining room, Mira said, rising. As is proper. Lady Thelen's lips thinned. How curious that propriety concerns you now, when it did not at the banquet. Her gaze fixed on the amber pendant. And how peculiar to find you adorned with the late Duchess's jewellery. The Duke shall hear of this appropriation. It was my wish, Seren said clearly. I gave it to Miss Holden for safekeeping. Did you indeed? Lady Thelen's voice dripped with disdain. Children have no authority to dispense family heirlooms. Remove it at once and return it to its rightful keeper. I am its rightful keeper, Seren replied, her chin lifting in a gesture so reminiscent of her father that Mira's heart clenched. And I have decided Miss Holden shall wear it today. Lady Thelen's complexion mottled. This impertinence confirms the physician's concerns. The governess's influence has made you willful and disobedient. No, madam, Mira interjected quietly. Lady Seren simply speaks her mind as befits her station. Surely the daughter of a duke need not fear expressing her wishes in her own home. Before Lady Thelen could retort, the duke himself appeared at the threshold, his tall form filling the doorway. His gaze travelled from his daughter's defiant stance to Mira's composed face, lingering momentarily on the amber pendant at her throat. I heard raised voices, he stated. Lady Thelen turned to him with practiced grace. Your Grace, I discovered Miss Holden wearing the Duchess's pendant, a shocking liberty. When I instructed her to return it, I gave it to her father, Seren interrupted. Just for today. The Duke's expression remained unreadable. And why would you do such a thing, daughter? So that you might see her properly, the child answered with devastating honesty. A hush fell. Lady Thelen's fan opened and closed nervously. I see, the Duke said finally, his gaze never leaving Mira's face. And what would you have me see, Seren? The child hesitated, then stepped forward with determination. That Miss Holden is kind and brave and makes me want to speak again. The admission hung in the air, simple yet profound. Lady Thelen, the Duke said evenly, I believe Lord Pembroke was asking after you in the conservatory. Her dismissal was unmistakable. With a stiff curtsy, she departed, fury evident in every line of her body. Father, Seren ventured once they were alone, will you dine with us today, here in the schoolroom? Miss Holden says learning happens best when we connect it to living. The Duke's gaze shifted to Mira, who stood with perfect composure, despite the amber pendant feeling suddenly heavy at her throat. Does she indeed, he murmured, and what other wisdom does Miss Holden impart? That courage often looks like extending one's hand, Seren replied, even when one fears it might not be taken. The Duke inhaled sharply, recognition flickering across his features. Slowly, with deliberate care, he removed his pocket watch and placed it upon the nearest table. Then perhaps, he said quietly, we might dine together, the three of us, and see what other lessons await. As servants hastily arranged a small table by the schoolroom window, Mira felt the weight of the Duke's gaze, heavy with questions unasked. The amber pendant caught the midday sun, transformed from memento of grief to bridge between worlds, past and present, loss and possibility, its warm light bathing them all in the glow of tentative connection. The season's final ball at Bridgerton Castle loomed like a gathering storm. 2 weeks had passed since the amber pendant changed hands, 2 weeks of quiet revolution within cold stone walls. The Duke had begun taking breakfast in the schoolroom, listening as Seren recited poetry or explained botanical diagrams, his eyes often straying to Mira's gentle guidance. "Your methods are unconventional, Miss Holden," he remarked one morning, as Seren sketched wildflowers gathered from the estate grounds. "Life itself is unconventional, Your Grace," Mira replied. "Why should learning be confined to dusty tomes when the world offers more vibrant instruction?" Something like amusement touched his lips. "You would have my daughter educated by meadows and streams rather than classics and mathematics?" "I would have her educated by both," Mira said, "and by the resilience of her own heart." These small exchanges multiplied, brief moments where formality yielded to genuine discourse. Yet public spaces remained governed by rigid protocol. In the presence of guests or Lady Thelen, the Duke maintained cool distance, though his eyes often sought Mira across crowded rooms. Lady Thelen had not abandoned her campaign. Whispers intensified. The governess was manipulating the child. The Duke had grown besotted with a commoner. The late Duchess's memory was being shamefully erased. On the night of the ball, these currents converged. Mira helped Seren prepare, pinning tiny roses in the child's hair. "Father has commanded our attendance tonight," Seren said, her voice stronger now, though still soft. "Both of us." Mira stilled. "Surely you misunderstood, dear heart. Governesses do not attend such functions except in service capacity." "He was most specific," Seren insisted. He said, "Tell Miss Holden her presence is required, not requested." A knock interrupted them. A maid entered bearing a gown of silver blue silk and a note sealed with the Bridgerton crest. "For you, Miss Holden," the maid said, unable to disguise her astonishment. "From His Grace." The note contained a single line in bold script. "Some battles require proper armor." Seren clapped her hands. "See? He wishes you to attend properly." "It would cause a scandal," Mira whispered, touching the exquisite fabric with reverent fingers. "Perhaps that is exactly what he intends," Seren replied with unexpected insight. The gown transformed Mira. Though modest by society standards, its cut and fabric spoke of quality beyond a governess's station. The amber pendant, which Seren had insisted she keep wearing, gleamed against the silk. "You look like a duchess," Seren declared. "I look like a governess in borrowed finery," Mira corrected gently. "Remember who we truly are, Seren. Appearances change nothing essential." Below, the ballroom already hummed with aristocratic energy. Lady Thalen held court near the Duke, her crimson gown a declaration of ambition. "You have outdone yourself, Aldrich," she said, using his given name with calculated intimacy. "The Tun will speak of nothing else this season." "Indeed," he replied absently, his gaze fixed on the grand staircase. "Then I trust tonight shall provide them ample material. I've taken the liberty of arranging for Lady Harrington's daughter to play the pianoforte," Lady Thelen continued. "A charming girl of excellent family. Perhaps Seren might find inspiration in a peer's accomplishments." "My daughter requires no such example," the Duke stated. "She possesses courage beyond her years." Lady Thalen's fan fluttered nervously. "Surely you don't mean to let her appear tonight, after the incident at the lantern banquet?" "I mean to honor her wishes," he replied, as any father should. A hush fell over the assembly as Seren appeared at the top of the staircase, her white dress simple yet elegant, tiny roses crowning her head. Beside her stood Mira, in silver blue silk, the amber pendant catching light like a fallen star. "Good God," someone muttered. "He's lost his senses entirely." Lady Thalen's face drained of color. "Aldrich, you cannot possibly intend—" "I intend many things this evening, madam," the Duke interrupted, his voice carrying with quiet authority. "Chief among them, setting certain matters right." He strode to the foot of the staircase and extended his hand as Seren and Mira descended. The gesture, publicly claiming their connection, sent ripples of shock through the ballroom. "Your Grace," Mira murmured, hesitating at the final step. "Miss Holden," he replied, just loudly enough for those nearby to hear. "I believe we have unfinished business from the lantern banquet." Confusion flickered across her face. "The dance," he clarified, offering his arm. "My daughter began it. I should like to continue it if you are willing." The orchestra, sensing momentous shift, began a gentle waltz. The Duke led Mira to the center of the floor, where no one dared join them. "You court scandal, Your Grace," Mira said softly as they began to move in perfect rhythm. "I court honesty," he corrected. "After years of frozen silence, the Tun will not forgive such a display." "I do not require their forgiveness. His hand tightened slightly at her waist. "Only yours." Mira's step faltered. "Mine. For failing to see what my daughter saw immediately, that some souls enter our lives not as obligation, but as salvation." The amber pendant gleamed between them as they turned, a physical manifestation of the bridge being built, word by word, step by step. "I make no claims upon your future, Miss Holden," the Duke continued, his voice intimate despite their public stage. "But I would ask if you might consider Verrington Castle more than temporary employment." "What would you have it be?" Mira asked, hardly daring to breathe. "Home," he said simply, "for as long as you wish it." From the edge of the dance floor, Lady Thelen stepped forward, her face contorted with fury. "This has gone far enough, Your Grace. The Governess has bewitched both you and the child with common sentimentality. She even wears the Duchess's pendant, flaunting her presumption." The music faltered. Dancers stilled. All eyes turned to the tableau at the center of the floor. "The pendant was my gift," Seren's voice rang out as she moved to stand beside her father and Mira. "As was my trust." Lady Thelen's laugh was brittle. "A child cannot give what belongs to her heritage. That pendant is a Verrington heirloom, meant for the Duchess alone." "Indeed it is," the Duke agreed, his hand still at Mira's waist. "And I find it exactly where it belongs." A collective gasp rippled through the assembly. "Father," Seren said clearly, reaching for both their hands, "ask her properly, before witnesses, as tradition demands." The Duke's expression softened as he looked down at his daughter, then back to Mira, whose face reflected wonder and trepidation in equal measure. "Before these witnesses," he said, his voice carrying to every corner of the ballroom, "I declare my intentions toward Miss Mira Holden to be honorable and lasting. The pendant she wears is not merely borrowed, but bestowed, a token of my esteem and that of my daughter." He took Mira's hand and knelt before her, reversing her gesture from weeks before, the Duke of Verrington, one of England's proudest nobles, on one knee before a governess. "You knelt first," he said, more quietly now. "You saw my daughter when all others turned away. You awakened voices long silenced by grief. If your heart permits, I would ask for the honor of your hand, that Verrington might hear laughter in its halls once more." Tears glistened in Mira's eyes. "Your Grace." "Aldrich," he corrected gently. "My name is Aldrich, and it has been too long since anyone has spoken it with affection." Seren tugged at Mira's gown. "Say yes," she whispered audibly. "Please say yes." The ballroom held its collective breath, a sea of judgment and astonishment surrounding the small island of truth at its center. Mira's fingers touched the amber pendant, then extended to the Duke's upturned hand. "Yes," she said simply. "Yes to your name, your daughter, and your heart." As he rose and drew her close, the pendant caught between them, its amber heart glowing with renewed purpose. And when the Duke turned to the stunned assembly, his arm protectively around Mira and his other hand clasping his daughter's, his voice rang with certainty. "The season ends tonight," he declared, "but the true dance of Verrington is only beginning." Lady Thelen's fan clattered to the floor, its sound lost beneath the swell of music as the orchestra, sensing the Duke's victory, resumed its waltz with triumphant vigor. And as Aldrich Verrington guided his daughter and future bride in a circle of their making, the amber pendant turned between them, no longer a memento of loss, but a beacon lighting the way forward, step by step, heart by heart. Spring arrived at Verrington Castle with unprecedented vigor, as if nature itself celebrated the thawing that had occurred within its stone walls. The formal gardens, long maintained but rarely enjoyed, now hosted daily excursions as Seren led her father and Mira through paths her mother had once designed. "She would have liked you tremendously," Seren confided to Mira as they sat beneath a blossoming apple tree, the Duke nearby reviewing estate papers. "Mother always said the measure of nobility was not in one's bloodline, but in one's capacity for courage." "A wise woman," Mira replied, adjusting the amber pendant that had become her constant companion. "I should have valued her friendship greatly." "You honor her memory in ways Lady Thelen never comprehended," the Duke said, setting aside his documents. "Elise believed in living fully, not in preserving grief like pressed flowers." The mention of Lady Thelen brought a momentary shadow. Following the ball, she had departed for the continent, spreading tales of the Duke's madness and the Governess's manipulation. Yet the scandal she predicted had largely dissolved when the Queen herself sent congratulations upon hearing how the child had blossomed. "The banns will be read on Sunday," Aldrich said, moving to sit beside them on the stone bench. "The village is quite abuzz with preparations." "Are you certain, Aldrich?" Mira asked quietly. "There is still time to choose a more conventional path." His laugh was warm, transformed from the cold reserve of months past. "Conventional paths led me to frozen solitude. I prefer this road, however untraveled." "The servants say we make a peculiar family," Seren observed, twining a strand of apple blossom into a crown. "A duke who laughs, a governess who dances, and a child who speaks her mind." "Then let us be peculiar together," Aldrich declared, taking Mira's hand. "The Tun shall simply have to accustom themselves to our eccentricity." As the afternoon light gilded the castle towers, a small orchestra arrived to practice for the wedding festivities. Their music drifted through the gardens, a gentle waltz that brought immediate recognition to Mira's face. "The same melody," she murmured. "From the lantern banquet," Aldrich confirmed. "I commissioned it specially." Seren clapped her hands. "You must dance. Here, where the blossoms fall like snow." Aldrich rose and extended his hand to Mira. "Will you indulge us, my dear? One practice before our official first waltz as husband and wife?" Mira allowed herself to be drawn to her feet, the amber pendant swinging gently as she moved into his embrace. "I never imagined," she confessed as they began to turn among falling petals, "that kneeling before a silent child would lead to this moment." "I never imagined," he countered, "that watching you kneel would teach me how to rise again." Seren twirled nearby, scattering her blossom crown as she moved in harmony with them, her laughter a counterpoint to the waltz. "Before these witnesses," Aldrich said softly, nodding toward the trees where birds gathered, the flowers that perfumed the air, and most importantly, the daughter whose healing had begun their journey, "I pledge myself anew, not merely as husband, but as a man awakened to joy." Mira's eyes shimmered with emotion. "And I, before these same witnesses, pledge to honor the past that shaped you both even as we create our future together." "And I," Seren declared, inserting herself between them with a child's perfect timing, "promise to remind you both when you forget how to dance." They laughed together, the sound rising to mingle with the music and the soft rustle of apple blossoms. The amber pendant caught the late afternoon sun, transformed into a golden heart that beat in time with the waltz. In the distance, Bridgerton Castle stood against the sky, no longer a mausoleum of grief but a sanctuary of possibility. Its windows reflected the setting sun like welcoming lanterns, beckoning the unlikely family toward home. And as twilight settled over the gardens, three figures continued their dance. Noble and commoner, parent and child, past and future, moving in perfect harmony as the music played on, a reminder that sometimes the most profound journeys begin with the simplest invitations, a hand extended, a knee bent, and the courage to say, "Dance with me." For in those three words lay the essence of love itself, the willingness to meet another heart in its own space, to move together through joy and sorrow, and to create, step by step, a pattern beautiful enough to honor what was lost while celebrating what had been found. The waltz of Bridgerton had truly begun. The truest nobility lies not in birth or fortune, but in the courage to kneel before another's pain. When we dare to see those whom others shun, we discover that healing rarely comes through grand gestures, but through simple presence and the whispered invitation to rejoin the dance of life. Perhaps there exists in your own life someone waiting at the edges, holding their heart like an amber pendant, afraid to step forward, yet longing to be seen. Remember the governess who changed a duchy with 3 words and a bent knee. Remember that love, in its purest form, always begins with the decision to notice what others ignore. If this tale of quiet courage has touched your heart, share your thoughts below. For every story shared creates its own dance, moving from one heart to another in an endless waltz of connection.